People still believe that doing good deeds will accumulate virtue. Sowing good causes will reap sweet fruits. However, life sometimes does not operate according to that fairness. John Upton Jr. has dedicated his life to helping disadvantaged orphans. However, his fate was too short. In 2013, in the middle of a peaceful morning, John was murdered right in front of his house. A sudden shooting ended the life of a man who always lived for others. What ultimately led to this tragedy? Who took your life? Let's explore the twisted story right now. Before going into the mysteries surrounding his heartbreaking death, let's go back in time to understand better. John Upton Jr., born in 1956 in California, USA, he is not a big Hollywood star nor a powerful figure in the political world, but he is a documentary filmmaker with a strong passion for human rights issues, especially protecting abandoned and abused children. Perhaps if one were to choose an image to describe John, it would be a small light, but bright enough to guide those who are lost in the dark. He not only used the camera lens to record painful stories, but also used his own hands to change people's fate. This was most evident in 1990, when he happened to see an ABC News report about orphans in orphanages in Romania. They are not simply unlucky children, but small creatures locked in cramped rooms, neglected, hungry, and without love. Those images can make anyone feel sad, but most people just sigh and continue with their lives. But not John. He knows he cannot leave those little creatures alone. So, within just a few days, he arranged to fly to Romania and enter the traumatic orphanages himself. And what he witnessed was even more horrifying than the footage on television, when hundreds of children were emaciated, malnourished, and suffered from serious diseases without any treatment. And yet, some children are locked in iron cages, as if they are not human, but animals in a zoo. There was no one to hug them, no one to comfort them when they cried. Just dirty walls and scary, lifeless eyes. Witnessing that scene, John rushed to help with everything he had. And in just a few years, with the enthusiastic support of humanitarian organizations, John helped more than 24 children leave Romania, bringing them to America with the opportunity to adopt and receive medical treatment. One of those children is Isidore Ruckel, the poor boy who hugged his leg and begged to be released from this hell on earth. And now, Isidore also has a real home. What's worth mentioning here is not just what John did, but how he did it. He is not a philanthropist who raises money from afar or an activist who just shouts slogans. He is the type of person who is willing to jump into the middle of a crisis, personally study each situation, and fight the system head-on to gain fairness. Not only stopping after his success in Romania, John also continued to contribute to other projects, helping abused children, supporting lonely elderly people, and fighting for the rights of people with disabilities, because he believes that documentary film is not just a tool for storytelling, but a powerful weapon for social change. All of those ideals were also the motivation for him to found Media for a Cause, a non-profit organization specializing in producing free documentaries for charity organizations, helping the voices of disadvantaged people to be heard. It's admirable. Not only that, in the eyes of his friends, John was also considered a person with a big heart and a tireless soul. He is not rich, nor does he have any power behind him, but he has something stronger than anything, which is the belief that he can make a difference. He was also honored to receive the Emmy Award for Most Inspirational Person at the Pasadena Civic Theater. The moment he stepped onto the stage, under bright lights, not only marked a filmmaker's achievement, but also aroused emotion and admiration from onlookers. John's glamorous life seemed as peaceful and happy as he had ever done until March 28, 2013. A tragedy struck his life. He was murdered and left this world. According to the police force and forensics, his body was found in Ensenada, San Diego, California, in a state of loss of a lot of blood. His whole body was stiff and there was a hole in his head, as if he had been hit by a bullet. Very quickly, the police blocked the scene and quickly stepped in to investigate John's mysterious death. According to initial verification, It is known that John and his girlfriend Evelyn Zella rented a house on Lone Jack Road, California, USA in April of 2011. And right next to John's house is a 2.5-acre plot of land owned by Michael Vilken, a mysterious man with a cold appearance, few words, and seemingly no desire to associate with anyone. It is known that Michael Vilken was born in the Soviet Union and was an economist in Georgia. However, he migrated to America in 1987 with the hope of building a new, better life. And he decided to buy a piece of land in 2008 on Lone Jack Road, a sunny and windy area of California. But for him, this is not a place to enjoy nature or build a home, but a large investment project. So, Michael wanted to clear all the trees, flatten all the bushes, erect a structure to resell for profit. And then day after day, he worked hard with his axe and saw, laboriously cutting down trees and tilling the soil, as if he wanted to control every inch of land under his feet. Moreover, Michael was also extremely uncomfortable with the trees and green bushes around the small road, where neighbors often passed. So, he personally cut down each tree stump and each leaf branch, turning the land into an empty place according to his wishes. Michael's inherent OCD syndrome makes neighbors and John, nature lovers, feel unbearable because for them, it is a part of the neighborhood, part of the common space. And then the conflict began. At first, it was just uncomfortable looks, but the words became more and more frequent, leading to heated arguments right in the middle of the dusty dirt road. John repeatedly asked Michael to stop, or at least get a permit before demolishing anything, but Michael didn't seem to mind at all. "You are cutting down trees right on someone else's land," John reminded. "I only do what is necessary," Michael replied. His voice was calm, but his eyes were cold. Both refused to give in, but who is right in this story? Through the eyes of a number of rice-based cameras, some people think that John is a quick-tempered person who likes to interfere in other people's affairs, while some people say that Michael is truly a scary person, always taciturn, quiet, but always has unpredictable plans in his mind. Two men with two different lifestyles, two opposite goals. But how did such a seemingly small dispute become a story that made the whole neighborhood shudder? And is John really a troublemaker? Or is Michael Vilken an easily angered person, willing to do anything to protect what belongs to him? The tension did not stop there. Michael, with his somewhat selfish nature, began to think more wirely of John than anyone else. He was always afraid that one day John would ruin his investment dream. Could this be the seed that caused John to end his life in this painful way? Don't rush to leave the screen. What happens next will surprise you. And around August 2012, Michael Vilken made a strange decision that few people can explain. He bought a .22 caliber pistol. Strangely, for a man with no criminal record, no hobby of hunting, and nothing to do with the underworld or dangerous activities. So, what did he buy it for? The answer Michael gave did not make anyone feel more secure. He said he needed a gun for self-defense. But defend yourself against whom? Before some invisible enemy that he only noticed, or before his own neighbor, John Upton? Is someone like John really such a serious threat that Michael feels the need to arm himself? Or is it all just interference, paranoia that Michael draws in his head? A few days later, on a fall morning in October 2012, San Diego County Sheriff's Deputy Scott Hill received a call. On the other end of the line was a man's voice, low and slow, as if every word had been carefully considered before leaving his mouth. "Can I bring a gun?" This was not the first time Police Officer Hill received questions about gun ownership multiple times, but the way this man asked made him feel strange, and he frowned and replied that he wanted to know why the man wanted to carry a gun. The man replied that he wanted to defend himself because someone was plotting to kill him. Officer Hill asked if the person had threatened him, and the man replied that he had not, but who knew what would happen. Immediately, Scott Hill felt something was wrong because if this man was not threatened, not in danger, then why did he seem so haunted? Mr. Hill then replied in a serious voice, "Bringing a gun to an argument is never a good idea. If you make the wrong decision, you could be arrested." After that somewhat decisive answer, the man on the other end was silent for a few seconds, then hung up. Could that man be Michael? If so, what is he really planning? And the story doesn't end there. Just a week later, when Hill and a colleague were conducting patrols in the area near Michael's residence, Michael suddenly approached the police chief with a cold expression and stared at the police officer Hill. Police officer Hill was confused and didn't know what was going on when Michael started asking, "I want to hear about the legal risks of using and carrying a gun." Police officer Hill immediately remembered the man who had called him the day before to ask about this issue, and as expected, the man on the call was Michael. But he only received a tough answer from the police officer Hill. "Call a lawyer. I cannot give you legal advice." When Michael heard the answer, he was silent for a long time, then turned away. But even though he didn't say anything else, Scott Hill had a feeling this wasn't the end of the story. And that hunch quickly became well-founded when one late afternoon in late 2012, Vince Sampo, a land surveyor hired to measure Michael's land, finished the job. Michael escorted Vince to the car, and Vince saw something scary in Michael's open car, which was a new gun. That gun was lying there, not hidden at all, not accidentally exposed, but clearly arranged for others to see. And yes, when Vince saw it, Michael did not miss the opportunity to speak up. His voice was calm, but somehow unpredictable. "This is my gun." Vince paused for a moment. What does that statement mean? Is it simply a boast about a new purchase? Or is there a deeper message? What are you going to use it for?" Michael did not answer immediately, but he looked at Vince for a brief moment, and then finally, he slowly spoke, word by word, clearly and meaningful. Self-defense. Everything went by. No one knew what Michael's next move was until the birthday of Evelyn, John's girlfriend. That day at 6 a.m., he eagerly called her up to prepare for the party. However, the joy quickly disappeared when he received news that his mother had just passed away from cancer. Therefore, John was forced to temporarily put aside his girlfriend's birthday to return to mourn his mother. Amidst the pain of loss, he quietly walked on the familiar road, heading to the car repair station near his house to retrieve his car, preparing for the journey back home with a heavy heart. At home, Evelyn had just sent John away for less than 2 minutes. While returning to her room, the peaceful atmosphere of the morning was quickly torn apart by 2 sharp explosions, echoing in the air like a cold punch hitting the silence. Evelyn was startled and ran out, calling out the name "John" over and over, but there was only a heavy silence in response. An invisible fear tightened her chest. Then, suddenly, Evelyn collapsed, her limbs shaking as she saw John lying on the ground with his luggage, his eyes wide open, with a shot in the stomach, a shot in the head, without a chance to resist. Evelyn was about to kneel down in pain to hug her unfortunate boyfriend's body when suddenly a cold voice rang out from the front. "Don't take any more steps." Evelyn looked up and discovered Michael standing there, just a few feet away from her, the shiny pistol in his hand, still pointed straight at her. His face was not angry or panicked, but terrifyingly calm, as if everything that had happened now had been planned by him in advance. For a moment, Evelyn found herself frozen. There were only a few steps between her and Michael, but she felt like she was facing a predator, and with just one small mistake, she would be the next prey. She slowly raised her hands, not daring to breathe loudly, then slowly backed away and tried to run away. But it seemed Michael didn't want to let her go and started pulling the trigger. Evelyn screamed in panic and clutched her head to prepare herself for the inevitable painful end. But then, no gunshot rang out. A moment of eerie silence prevailed before she realized Michael was out of bullets. Without hesitating for another second, Evelyn ran as fast as she could, breathing heavily, her heart beating wildly. As she ran, she heard cursing behind her, the heavy footsteps of Michael chasing her. But then luck gave her a chance to survive again when Michael tripped over an obstacle, causing him to hug his leg and writhe in pain. Anyway, this was her chance. After returning home, she called the police to report the whole incident. Very quickly, Michael was arrested for investigation of the case, and in the intensive investigation room with prosecutors, he repeatedly asserted that he was only defending himself. Furthermore, he also told the police that John had insulted him for the past year and even made threats just because he wanted to control everything around him, even things that did not belong to John. But Michael's story had big holes because, according to the investigation and Evelyn's testimony, John did not have a gun. No one had ever seen him carrying a weapon, and there was no evidence that he ever threatened Michael's life. The only thing John was holding in his hand when he collapsed was not a gun, but just a cell phone. However, in order to verify more information and prosecute the case, the police had to postpone the interrogation and begin further investigation. And then clues about important evidence became increasingly clear when the police discovered that Michael's phone search history contained 22 to 50 searches for information related to guns, especially silenced guns. Furthermore, he also repeatedly asked the police about in-depth gun issues. But when questioned about this, Michael shrugged and calmly replied, "I'm worried about wolves appearing on my property. If I need to shoot, I don't want to scare the neighbors." But obviously, if Michael simply wanted a gun for self-defense, Michael could go to the store, choose a random gun, and that's it. But he spent time researching and learning about weapons thoroughly, reading every review, comparing every little detail, pondering the difference between guns. This is essentially the behavior of a person contemplating barbaric thoughts. With all that evidence, the prosecutor decided to bring this case to court for trial. In 2014, Michael's first instance trial took place in California under a tense atmosphere. Here, Michael testified that John challenged him and did not turn away when Michael intended to shoot.
Which was, "Don't cut the trees here." When he was talking to me angrily, it was like, "Ugh."
But the prosecutor was not easily convinced by those excuses and showed the police's previous video interview with Vilken, when he himself said that John turned away as if wanting to avoid the bullet. So why did he still pull the trigger? This left the jury asking, was it an act of self-defense or simply a cold execution? Evelyn also testified that several months before the shooting, John showed her a gun that she did not know he owned, but she advised him to throw it away, and on that fateful day, John was completely unarmed. And two workers present at the time of the incident also testified for John. They recalled that John was not a belligerent person. On the contrary, he even politely offered to move his SUV so as to not to interfere with their work. Another witness from the prosecution also said they did not hear any threats or arguments before the gun went off. All of this quashed Vilken's argument that he was threatened and forced to fire in self-defense. Turns out, his testimony was full of holes. It was just a story made up to hide the cruel truth. And then, the trial became even more tense when a jury member was removed for performing his own experiments related to the case, forcing the deliberation process to begin again. But that doesn't change the truth. Only a short time later, the next trial continued and the jury came to the final conclusion. Defendant Michael Vilken is guilty of first-degree murder and the assault with a weapon, sentenced to 64 years to life in prison. The prosecutor also confirmed that at the scene there was only one weapon found, which was Vilken's Magnum 44. This is also the key evidence that made the jury agree with a guilty verdict. And at the moment the verdict was announced, Michael Vilken silently bowed his head. Perhaps this was the first time he truly realized he was wrong, but it was all too late. Tamara, Michael Vilken's wife, also almost collapsed when she heard the verdict. Her face was pale, her lips trembled, as if she still couldn't believe that the man who once shared her life with her had now officially become a murderer in the eyes of the law. And before the moment Michael was handcuffed and prepared to be escorted out of the court, Tamara tried to rush towards him, but was stopped by security guards. Her voice was hoarse, full of unanswered questions. "Why, Michael? Why didn't you stop? You could have lived a different life. Why?" But Michael didn't come back. He just walked away, quietly, his shoulders no longer as arrogant as before. Also, at the sentencing hearing, John's stepdaughter could not hold back her tears as she expressed her extreme pain. "I cannot understand why someone can take another person's life without showing any remorse." As for Evelyn, she also could not forget the moment she witnessed John take his last breath. She cried and fainted, constantly calling John's name. As for John's father, Mr. John Upton Jr., did not cry, but his face was full of resentment. He immediately filed a lawsuit against Vilken and asked for $5 million in damages, plus punitive compensation for up to $10 million. The lawsuit alleges Vilken acted with willful malice, planning to murder John Upton Jr. in cold blood. The trial officially ended, but its echoes still linger. The pain of John's passing makes those left behind feel sad, because in his short but brilliant life, John Upton Jr. had constantly fought for the small, forgotten, abandoned lives in cold orphanages in Romania. His love and steadfastness not only brought hope to dozens of children, but also created a real wave of change, a torch that was passed from hand to hand, a seed that sprouted in the hearts of people who shared the same ideals. One of the people deeply influenced by John's legacy was Isidore Ruckel, who later devoted his life to helping orphans, continuing the path that John had paved. On his personal website, Ruckel dedicated an entire section to commemorate that silent hero, as a reminder that the light of kindness has never been extinguished. Perhaps there would be no more complete conclusion to this story than to pay tribute to a man who spent his life doing great things, not for fame, not for admiration of the crowd, but simply because he believed it was the right thing. Not only that, after hearing about John's passing, those who accompanied him and witnessed what he did also expressed their condolences for him and always remembered him with respect. One of John's fans once wrote on his personal page a status line, "I miss him and hope to see him again in heaven one day." And perhaps many other people also have a similar wish in their hearts. One day they will see John smile again, hear his passionate voice telling about unfinished plans and unfinished struggles. Michael Vilken's case is not just a story of violence, but also a tragedy of bigotry, ego, and poor decisions. A seemingly trivial conflict, a dispute over some bushes, escalated into murder, taking the life of a man full of ambition and compassion. John Upton Jr. did not deserve to die that way, and Michael Vilken also personally destroyed his own life because of a moment of anger and a prolonged mindset of hatred. The profound lesson from this case is the devastating power of hatred and bigotry. A word may not kill anyone, but a cruel thought nurtured over years can turn a person into a murderer. And if Michael had chosen to dialogue, if he had taken a step back, perhaps things would not have come to this heartbreaking end. Remember, in everyday disputes, sometimes letting go is not about losing, but about saving yourself and those around you. Don't let temporary anger cost you your whole life. So the case ends here, a story full of tragedy, loss, and valuable lessons. Hello, and see you soon.